about humanity.
This Shattering Concoction cast on crit Ranger build will see you ripping through T15s and T16 maps with ease and make extremely comfortable experiences out of both breaches and boss encounters. It also makes chaos runs a very pleasant experience, deleting all of the bosses and running through the gauntlet aspect of the challenge with no issues at all, making this build a highly effective farming tool. It can handle Zesh up to T3 reasonably well, provided you are mechanically sound, unlike I am. In terms of keeping updated with our progress on the Pathfinder, be sure to drop the video a like and sub to the channel to keep informed. I'm also streaming on YouTube and Twitch, so jump in and come ask any questions. Now, let's get into it. In terms of the skills, we're going to go over the offensive abilities first, and first and foremost, we're looking at Shattering Concoction. What a skill this is, folks. Gives us plus 11% to critical hit chance from the get-go, which is absolutely massive. And if we just look at the tooltip here, we're doing 160,000 DPS, and that is with scatter shot. So if I take scatter shot off, that skyrockets up to 250,000 plus, but of course we want to be using scatter shot because that gives us 3 concoctions rather than 1 being thrown, and I'll explain how we are reaching kind of the high level there that you can see that's giving us that massive damage boost in a moment. But first up, let's go through the gems. We've got scatter shot, which gives us those additional projectiles, as I've just said. We've got cold mastery, which is upping all cold skill levels by 1, and we've got martial tempo for that increased attack speed of 25%, very effective. And then we've got super critical, so supported skills have 100% increased critical damage bonus, but that gives us 20% less crit hit chance. It's totally worth it, folks. It works. You proc cast on crit like mad using this setup. I'll try to keep this really simple. In terms of Shattering Concoction, you are just freezing everything and shattering them, and because we are using the Herald tech, which I'm going to go over in a moment, and Pulse account for that shattering effect as well, you just create this lovely synergy that is just clearing screens. It's super effective at freezing bosses as well with the choices that we've made with our gear and with our passives, which we'll go over in a moment as well. It's just such a punchy cold skill. As this is a crit chance build, let's look at those numbers. It's got 38.59% crit chance at the moment. It was at around 45 to 47%, I believe the number was. I had to strip back a little bit on the offensive capabilities to make sure we had the survivability in the passive tree. That's why the number's a little bit lower. This still absolutely slaps. I've tested and tested it, and this is a nice spot to be in regardless. And of course, we've got 383% crit damage bonus. You've got to try and strike a balance between these two numbers. There's no point critting if there's no big multiplier going on. You've got to kind of find the sweet spot there, and obviously cast on crit really helps with getting Eye of Winter out, as you're about to find out, but you do need to make sure the critical damage bonus is pumped up as well, just so we're getting our bang for buck there, folks. Then we are back with our old friends, the Herald of Thunder and the Herald of Ice. We are using the elemental damage swap tech that we were using on the Deadeye over on the Pathfinder, and I was a bit apprehensive about trying this, but it actually works out brilliantly. So let's just go over how this is set up. We've got on the Herald of Thunder glaciation for 50% more freeze build-up. We've got 30% cold res penetration through cold penetration. We've got cold infusion, 25% increased damage as extra cold, but less lightning damage, obviously, and long shot, so things are being hit further off the screen. You've seen in the montages that I've been throwing around how far this reaches, and when you've got Herald of Thunder maxed out in terms of quality, I think you're getting 4 or 5 bolts of lightning at a time. It's just absolutely cracked and so effective. Moving on to Herald of Ice, we've got lightning infusion for 25% increased damage as lightning. We've got conduction for 100% more chance to shock, along with overcharge for 75% increased magnitude of shocks inflicted with supported skills. And finally, we've got innovate for that 35% increased damage as lightning for 3 seconds on killing a shocked enemy. So we're just creating that nice wraparound synergy that we're so familiar with from using the Deadeye, and it works so well here, as you've seen as well, folks. Now, in terms of boss fights, there's a little bit of tech here, and I am going to give a shout out to a very great creator called Size. They also make Ranger builds. Size actually gave me a little bit of a tutorial, shall we say, on how to proc cast on crit more effectively, and also how to use this lightning warp ball ball lightning tech to take down bosses. So if you haven't already, please do go and check their channel out. They're an absolutely fantastic creator, and I owe them a lot for this build. They've really helped me out understand how to bring this to life. Essentially what we're doing when we come up against a boss, we are going to throw our ball lightning, and then we are going to quickly use lightning warp to land on them, detonate the ball lightning, and create shocked ground, which debuffs the enemy heavily and makes that massive burst window open up for us. And when we put hypothermia, which I will talk about in a moment, on top of that, and then start launching as many of those concoctions as possible, which then synergizes with cast on critical, which we're going to go over in a moment, the damage just starts to get ridiculous, because cast on critical is casting Eye of Winter, which is giving 20 stacks of critical weakness. You can see where I'm going with this, folks, and you can tell I'm getting excited because it is a really great interaction. In terms of ball lightning, we're using arcane tempo for 25% more cast speed, and we're also using acceleration just to make that ball move quicker. In terms of lightning warp, we've got persistence for 40% more duration. It just keeps that window wider for us when we're doing DPS. And lightning mastery for +1 level of supported skills there, just to up the ante there as well. You'll see that we've got a space on lightning warp. What we do before a boss fight is we take overcharge to make our shocked ground more effective. This increases the magnitude of shock, so when you get that shock going, it just makes things a little bit more bang for your buck, which is fantastic. Cast on critical. So this is an interesting one. It costs 100 spirit. I will say that as a caveat. We'll talk about spirit when we get to the gear section. In terms of what we've got going on here, folks, we've got Eye of Winter socketed, which gives us critical weakness on hit. You can stack this 20 times, so that brings us up to, I believe it's 10% critical hit chance, so it's upping things even more. Inspiration is socketed in there for 40% less mana cost, which is really important just to sustain during fights. We've got impetus as usual for a cast on skill for that 40% increased energy gain, and also energy retention to have 35% chance to refund half their energy cost. Notice how I don't have any 5 links in here yet. I actually dropped a perfect jeweler's orb and sold it because I was hard up on divines. So you don't need 6 sockets or 5 sockets, whatever you want to call it, for this build to be effective. In terms of hypothermia, I only use this curse when I'm struggling or when a mob has a good resistance or whatever. You drop this and it just bursts through their resistances and allows Concoction to do work. So I use hypothermia on tanky elite, although there's not that many of them because this does so much damage, and always bosses to get that real large damage ramp going on that you've seen in the clips. And this is socketed with heightened curse for 25% increased effect of supported curses, and it's also socketed with cursed ground, so this means that the curse stays on the floor and things that stand in it are cursed rather than casting it and then it disappearing. I find this much more desirable because you can anticipate where enemies are moving to. Now, in terms of the defensive skills, this is where things can perhaps get a little bit more complicated. We are, of course, using Grim Feast here. That is on most of the time. Boss fights, before a boss fight, I often turn this off and I switch to Alchemist's Boon. What this does is it allows our flasks to regenerate. Sometimes you can find yourself getting mana starved if you're spamming concoctions, because if you didn't know, concoctions actually use the flask charges rather than our actual mana pool. So I sort of interchange this with things. There have been some instances when I've been doing particularly fruity chaos runs, I've had to take off something like cast on critical for a moment just to put that on. I actually find that cast on critical is sometimes overkill when we are mobbing. I'll try keep it on a lot of the time. I think in this video, one of the clips of me doing a breach, I actually didn't have cast on critical on and it still swipes through everything with very little effort at all. But it is important just to bear in mind, if you find yourself getting flask starved, use Alchemist Boon. It just gives you that little bit of an edge. In terms of the passives, there will be a pinned comment with the Mobalytics link for your reference, and I will go very quickly through our decisions here, and I will start off by saying I'm aware some of you are wanting me to go through the nitty-gritty of the order of events for creating this build. I will say that I created a leveling guide. I'll put the link in the description as well that goes over the starting point for this type of build. My advice to start with, folks, is just go full DPS till around level 50. I've not had any troubles, especially if you use Radiant Grief and Widow Hail, which we'll go over in a moment. Now, the actual skills themselves. In terms of our Pathfinder Ascendancy, this is an interesting one. I've got mine split up quite a lot. Obviously, we have to take Shattering, Concoction. I take the 6 passive points because this has really stretched the passive tree, as you're about to see in a moment. And now this is the bit that kind of got a bit of nuance to it. You could take the 12% flash charges gained and the 50% more flash charges gained. Well, I say could, you should take these, but you could extend this. Enduring Elixirs essentially makes any life flask effects continue to be sustained even when unreserved life is filled. So usually it would stop once you get full health. This prevents that from happening. So if you were taking flask effect passives, which I haven't in this current setup, which is something that I would like to experiment with, you would go this way. I've actually decided not to do that. I've gone this way and taken skill speed and just a bit less movement penalty. So when we're running through maps and farming, it's a bit more effective that way. That's what this build excels at. So that's why I've gone with this. In terms of the tree, the key places to go are here, Master Fletching for your 80% increased quiver effect, which stacks superbly with Widow Hail and a nice quiver, which we're going to speak about in the gear section in a moment. And then we've taken Catalysis for that increased elemental damage with attacks. We've also taken Stand and Deliver, which gives us that 40% increased critical damage bonus against enemies within 2 meters and 25% increased damage against enemies within 2 meters. You find yourself surrounded a lot, and from the clips you've seen, you sort of have quite a swashbuckling tanky approach, getting right in the thick of it, and it works really effectively. I've taken Acceleration for 3% movement speed and the skill speed of 10%, along with these 2 little nodes here for the skill speed. Pretty textbook stuff so far. We've also got Maiming Strike for 25% increased damage, and it's smaller nodes as well. And this is where things got a little bit difficult, if I'm honest, when I was building this. We've actually committed complete Ranger Sacrilege, completely sacked off evasion rating, and this felt weird. I was not expecting it to work, but once again, Sai's actually recommended that I do this, and I tried it, and hey, it works pretty nicely, folks. The only evasion nodes I have picked are these ones here, and that's just simply to create the join up to here. We've got 15 evasion there, 3% movement speed and 30% evasion rating, and 15% evasion rating there. We've moved up here. We've taken the 25 dex node because it just makes our life easier in that regard, and we've taken the attack speed nodes and the 1% increased attack speed per 15 dex. And I'm going to go over the different weapon sets at the end of this section because I have actually done some weapon set switching for this setup to work effectively, which I'll go over in a moment. We've gone up here to take this critical damage node here. We've got loads of crit bonus, crit chance, increase to our base crit chance. We're just wanting to get as many crits off as possible. We've got the usual Coming Calamity Herald node for that increased 50% damage for both Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder, which works brilliantly. We've continued to go up here. I've taken these unarmed damage nodes, which has been quite interesting. 14% increased damage with unarmed attacks, 14% again, 20% increased area of effect with unarmed attacks, reduced damage from unarmed attacks, but 20% increased attack speed. Concoction counts as an unarmed attack, so this affects that. And we've got 15% increased area of effect again here. I think that's really nice and effective. We've started to work into this little set of crit nodes here. I've actually had to strip away a little bit of damage to make sure that my energy shield is high enough, so that's why that's not fully decked out. We've then moved up here, and this area is very important, folks. We've taken Eternal Youth, which gives us the ability to recharge our energy shield with our life flask rather than our health. Our health regenerates like an energy shield, basically, but our energy shield gets healed by the life flask. When you're using Grim Feast and you've got such a high pool of energy shield, this is great. It's really nice, so I recommend it. And then we've taken these evasion energy shield ones just for extra energy shield, and we've got +1 maximum energy shield per 12 evasion rating on the body armor. I'm using Moria Invictus, so it's got a bit of evasion on, so it made sense for me. It might not for you, or it might. We'll talk about that in the gear section. And then we've got over here, this is a really important section, we've got all these crit chance nodes here. Crit chance, crit bonus, crit bonus, crit bonus and intelligence, crit hit recently, increased damage if you've dealt a crit hit recently, crit damage if you've dealt a crit hit recently, 30% damage if you've hit a crit hit recently in the last 8 seconds. It's just very, very nice at lifting our damage when we're playing that cast on crit setup. And we're going all the way up here. I've grabbed cold damage here. We've got 20% increased freeze build up and 50% increased damage with hits against frozen enemies. Absolutely massive in those burst windows in a boss fight when you get the hypothermia and the shock ground off and you get the freeze off. You start doing ridiculous damage. And we've gone all the way up from there. to this intelligence and energy shield setup. We've got the big intelligence node to make our life easier. 60% increased max energy shield, some 15s there. And then we've gone all the way to here. And this skill tree here, this node setup here is really important. Cold damage, cold pen, exposure, cold pen, and then we've got +1 to all cold skills. This just really lifts and elevates the damage that we are doing, folks. And I said that I would talk about how we've switched up the weapon skill points. This build is not completely finished. I do want to get a few more levels to squeeze some more out, but essentially what I've done is when I'm using Concoction, I've made it so my weapon switch has my Widow Hail and my quiver, which we will go over in the gear section in a moment, and that is this set here. I've just tried to use all the things we were using on the Deadeye, the cold pen, the magnitude of shock and chill. I've tried to make sure that that is in place so we're still getting the rolling effects of the damage, the rolling effects of the Herald. And further up the tree, we've got here some lightning damage, which I am going to keep moving through when I get some levels. I want to get to this Mag of Shock node here. And we've also got Frazzled, I think it's called, down here on our second set. And what I'll do is actually, I'll show you this really quickly. So when we are fighting a boss, what I will do is I will use Ball Lightning, then I will jump to it using Shock Ground, and that changes my setup to my bow, and it also changes it to our second set. So I've got our skills set here to be on weapon set 2. Can you see that? Yeah, weapon set 2. So picture this, I'll do it again. I'm fighting a boss, I throw it, I jump to it, I throw down Hypothermia, which is set on my switch back to my Widow Hail setup, and then I just start spamming. That's how it works. So I'll do it again just so we've got an example there. It's boom, boom, Hypothermia to switch back, and then spam. Because what that does is, I'll show you on the tooltip, if I don't switch back, what Shattering Concoction's damage? If I use, let's just use Ball Lightning. Look at that. Shattering Concoction goes down to 35. So I'll show you again. You can watch the damage. We go boom, boom, and then as soon as Hypothermia is thrown, back to that 160, and then we spam. That's really important that you get that right, that switch round right. And we do that because by having these extra lightning nodes on the passive tree attached to Lightning Warp, rather than just being blasé about it, it just allows us to squeeze out that bit more damage. Okay, so moving on to the gear, I'm just going to give you a little crash course in how mine is set up and give you some thoughts and ideas around each piece. Let's go over the bow and the quiver, which are non-negotiable at the moment, folks. You need a Widow Hail as highly rolled as possible. This is 244%. It's 6% off the max. If you can get this and corrupt it, if it's max roll already, and jack it up to 300%, you are laughing. They're very expensive. I've got mine socketed with 2 critical damage bonus soul cores. I am still on the fence as to whether this is better than elemental damage. I'm not sure. Maybe you could sound off in the comments and let me know. But the reason why Widow Hail is so important is it increases that equipped quiver effect. It synergizes with the passive nodes that we've already talked about, the Master Fletching, which is 80%. This is giving me around 324 increased effect from my quiver. My quiver has got 27% increased crit chance on the innate, and then it's got another 21%. So we're rocking 48% increased crit chance from hits. That is then multiplied by 324%. You can see where I'm going with this. Every single stat on that quiver is getting multiplied, including the plus level to all projectile skills. Your quiver needs plus all to projectile skills on it to be effective. You need crit chance. You need bow damage increase percentage. You need physical damage. Cold damage would help as well. Just pack as much DPS and level to projectiles on this as possible. And if you can get a better Widow Hail, you'll meet extra breakpoints to get even more plus skills. The plus skills are what make the damage so unbelievable with this build. So that is my advice for your quiver and your bow setup. I am using Hand of Wisdom and Action just because it's great. That 3% increased attack speed per 25 dex. You do not need to use these gloves. They are a nice thing to have. You could use a really nice increased resistance gloves to make life a lot easier, because resistance is quite hard to meet with some physical and cold damage, some attack speed. All that good stuff would work fine. Critical hit, all that good stuff. Just anything that's going to add to crit chance and overall damage and attack speed, resistances if needed, would be really effective. In terms of the belt, I am using a triple resist fire cold lightning setup with some max life, which is great. I am also using energy shield boots. Notice how I'm not using any evasion gear at the moment. I am not going to sit here and say that it's absolutely the way to go. That's just how I've built this character and how it worked. Okay, so energy shield as high as possible on the boots with 30% move speed, could be 35 obviously. 127 max life, stacking as much life as possible. Some resistances to fill in the gaps, which works nicely. In terms of the helm, I am using a pure energy shield helm. I've got 368 on here, and I've got 49 maximum life, which isn't great really. This was quite annoying to get, actually. I think it cost me about 60 exalts and a bit of lightning resist. It works. I'm actually going to move myself whilst we record this, just so you can see the energy shield values a little bit more clearly. But essentially, we're just trying to stack as much energy shield as possible. So when we're using Grim Feast, it'll effectively double. We're getting 5,200 energy shield using this setup. You can choose to use at Xeres Disdain, and I will show you what happens when we do this. Watch my energy shield. 3,386, giving us around 6,600 energy shield. Sounds great on paper. One caveat, folks. Third line of this helm. 23% of damage bypasses energy shield. This kicks you in the ass so many times, it's not even funny. I got so frustrated with using this. I was like, do you know what? Forget it. I'm just switching to pure energy shield and got as many energy shield bits as possible. So this is a nice thing to use. It just bites you quite often. You get nuked sometimes when you get stunned, and it's just not a pleasant experience. So just be careful when you use this. It's workable, but it's just frustrating. That's why I switched. Okay, you obviously socket everything you can with increased evasion energy shield as well. 20% there, 20% there. Now the chest. This is going to alarm people when they see this, like, oh, he's got a 5 socket. What the hell? Like, I've got a Moria Invictus, okay? I bought it and I absolutely love it. I think it's a great piece. Mine has got +10 to spirit per socket and +10 all res per socket, and I put chaos res ones in there as well. It's obviously a 5 socket, so it's very nice for 50 all res, 50 spirit, 35 chaos resistance. You do not need this chest piece. It's just a nice thing to have. I actually think I would be better placed to rework the entire build and get pieces to make up for all the resistance I have absolutely piled onto my chest, but as it stands at the moment, this works brilliantly, so I'm going to continue with it. You might want to find some sort of pure energy shield chest. You might want to find a hybrid one. It's up to you really. My advice would be just play it by ear and see what you've got. You can get your hands on this armor here, Ghost Rive, and if you can get one that is corrupted with 2 sockets and has a massive increase to the maximum life converted to energy shield, and then put some max life soul cores in there, or maybe some resistance soul cores in there, and use this instead, because watch what happens to my energy shield when I use this. 5,000. I've got 10,000 energy shield if I run around with this on. Mine's not at a point where I'm happy with it, and it absolutely wrecks my resistances because I don't have the resistance balance on the other items, as you've seen, so I'm having to use Moria Invictus. But using that Ghost Rive, you are going to be super tanky. In terms of the rings, I'm using this one, 7 to 12 cold damage, 143 max life, some dex, some all res, and some mana per kill. Mana per kill is really important just to keep us topped off and sustained. I'm using Pulsar Keln, and I'm quite proud of this Pulsar Keln, I will say. I rolled it. It landed on 30% cold damage, which is max, and then I corrupted it and it took it even higher, and then I've used some cold modifiers. It's gone up to 38% increased cold damage, but enemies chilled by your hits can be shattered as though frozen. This is what just makes everything absolutely blow through the screen. It's a really, really great ring. The higher you can get, the better. Really, really effective, folks. If you don't have a Pulsar Keln, you will not have as much impact as perhaps you've seen in the video, but you can use rings like this one. Bit of cold damage, 52 increased rarity of items found. Really, really tasty. You can also find rings that have really nice increase to cold damage anyway. Breach rings are fantastic for this, so keep your eye out for them. In terms of the amulet, I am using Ancient Aegis on my amulet. You've seen this before. It gives us 60% increased energy shield based on what is already on our chest. So we're not using the most effective amount of energy shield on our chest. Imagine if we had a pure energy shield one that had loads of stats on it and the resistances were maxed still, we'd be absolutely laughing, folks. So that would be something to consider. This has 41 spirit plus 3 to all projectile skills. Increased damage bonus. You can get crit chance on this, I think. And you just want to be getting as much as possible out of that. You know, a bit of life maybe if you can. Whatever you can get your hands on there, really effective. And finally, there's also an argument that you could maybe use Essence of the Mountain on your amulet, maybe. Like, there's also an argument to say you could use Essence of the Mountain. This is one of my old amulets I was using on the Deadeye. Max life, spirit, all res, 29 fire, Essence of the Mountain, an expensive anoint, but it just makes your cold damage feel a little bit more comfortable. Maybe you're in a position where you've already got insanely high amounts of energy shield using this Ghost Rive type setup, and you might want to switch that out there. The choice is yours. I'm just giving you some options, but the main thing to take away from this video, Widow Hail, rolled as high as possible, possibly with 3 sockets, corrupted out of its mind, and make sure that your quiver is crit chanced out of its mind with all the projectile skills, damage, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Check out this next video. It's got you covered. Take care of yourselves. Keep having fun. Come check out a stream on YouTube or Twitch, and I'll see you in the next one.